Professor Lin Zhong from Rice University. So Lin graduated from Princeton for his PhD, and then joined Rice afterwards, I guess, and then now he's an associate professor. So Lin is actually a rock star in the area of mobile computing.
I can dance.
And because he actually received the ACM SIG Mobile Rockstar Award for his contribution in mobile computing. Right? So if that's not enough evidence, just look at the number of award papers he had received. Lots of 3 award paper, best paper award from Mobisis, and also Aspolos last year. So if these are still not enough, Lin's pretty much on every mobile computing or related mobile top conference, TPC, SIGCOM, Mobicom, Mobisis, and WWW, ATC, a lot of things, right? So he's a busy guy, and we're very happy to have him here and talk about his fresh out of oven work, which we'll present in Aspolos 2015. And that's about how to save 10 milliwatts for free for smartphones. Okay? So let's extend a very hot welcome for him.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Hesse, for the nice introduction. Thank you for coming, and thank IEE for cover the bill. I very much enjoy Santa Barbara. It's such a nicer place than Houston, I have to say. You guys, grad students, you should really enjoy that. Yeah. So that's one reason I heard the attrition rate of grad students much lower than Rice. 50%. Oh, okay, so I should say it. Okay. So more grad students finish a PhD here than they do in Houston because we have very hot summer. Anyhow, so that's our students lock themselves up in the summer to do research. They have no beach to surf, to have fun. Okay, anyhow, so today I'm going to talk about some work we have done recently. So this is actually first time to talk about it, and it's about 10 million watts of power, how to save that little. And I hope those of you who come here apparently think 10 million watts still interesting and useful. It's my first time to talk about this, so it may sound a little bit rough, right? So, but if you have questions, so my explanation may not be that clear. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me anytime. Okay, so the answers I already put there is don't trust the drivers for power management, and I'll explain later on. So put a bit context of energy efficient design and power matters at different scales, right? A data center, and you worry about 10 watts, 1 watt's too little, and the people wouldn't bother to tune the system for 1 watt saving. But for 10 watts, we'll consider that. They would consider that for electricity bill, right? For your desktop computers, 1 watt would be important for thermal issues, right? And if you get a laptop battery power, then 0.1 watt matters because of battery lifetime. If you get in the real mobile domain, like smartphone wearables, 10 milliwatt and even 1 milliwatt start to matter. So that's where my group recently care about. We try to squeeze the system design just for the last 1 milliwatt to save the last 1 milliwatt power. Okay. So I'm going to tell you the secret of efficiency, right? The efficiency is the secret is actually like a lazy grad student. Don't do any unnecessary things, right? Including you do it as slow as possible, just finish before deadline, and don't over provision. Don't put more time than necessary into it, and don't do useless things. Don't waste your time, and reuse previous results, right? If you have done it before, reuse results. Don't do it again. My favorite, maybe your favorite, the trick of to be efficiency is go to sleep when you have nothing to do, right? So this is called power management, right? Essentially, if a part of your computer is not doing useful thing, it's not needed, put in the sleep mode, stop the clock, even get the power, so that stop draining power consumption, right? And there are two power management. There's typically you can do it in 2 ways, and people do in both ways. One is system power management, which you use every day on your smartphone. When you press a button to turn off, not turn off, to put into standby, it's called system suspension. That is, the whole system go to suspended state and stop functioning. Nothing work. It may wake up, you're ready to receive incoming calls, things like that, but overall it's not functioning. It's called system suspension. Actually, Android aggressive with that system suspension. If it's inactive for like a few seconds, it will suspend the whole system. You probably wouldn't even notice that. You press a button and come back again, right? That's system suspension. That's not what we talk about. There are a lot of problems with system power management, like Charlie Hu's group from Purdue. They have done a lot of work to fix wake lock box. That's about system power management. What I would talk about today is about runtime power management. That is, your system is still working. You're using it, but you're not using each component, right? Some of the components are idle, and there are mechanisms there that you can put this component to sleep. Your system on chip these days have mobile system on chip like iPhone 6 have over 2 billion transistors in that chip, right? When you use it, you're not using all 2 billion, right? You're using probably less than 10% of it, and the rest of them should be put in sleep to conserve power. Okay, that's the focus of today's talk. How to put idle components into no power state. And this, for the rest of the talk, I'll give you a little bit of background about how Linux, today's SoC, does runtime power management. And I will give you some example, what's wrong with it, right? Why we need to change it. And then I'll talk about our proposal, a centralized runtime power management architecture. And then I'll talk a little bit more about our ongoing work. To impress you about how many components in a mobile SoC, this is actually taken from TI's OMAP 4's technical reference manual. What impresses you, you don't have to read the blocks, but there are so many blocks here, right? Your CPU here, Android system runs here, you have DSP, you have GPU, you have multimedia codec, you even have a face detection IC. And on the peripheral bus, you have several tens of I/O controllers, GPIO, I2C, SPI, USB, you name it, right? So the system on chip is just, it's like a Chinese hot pot. Everything you like, you throw into it, right? And but most of them are not exposed to the third-party programmers. And this is a chip actually used on Google Glass and Galaxy Nexus, a bunch of other phones. To give you an impression of why managing the idle component is important, this die photo shows where are the CPU. This is a dual-core CPU. Right. This is where your Android operating system, your app you download from Android Play Store would run from here. Right. The rest of it are the other components, accelerators, GPU, DSP, I/O controllers. Perhaps some of this is a level 2 cache, but I'm not sure. But this part is a CPU and level 1 cache. Okay. It's definitely important for you to put any unused modules into sleep mode, into no power mode, even if your application is using this CPU. Okay, that's very important for overall power efficiency. Now, the module, I'll use this term throughout the talk. The SoC module is a basic unit for power management, right? And a module have modes and states, and be careful about this too. Modes are software modes, right? Software could disable or enable a module, right? By disable module, software is essentially telling the hardware to say, I have saved the context of this module. You can do whatever with this guy. You can turn off, kill it, whatever you want to do, but I have saved everything. It's safe to turn it off. And then software, that's it. Software job is to disable or enable it, okay? The hardware job is once the software disable the module, the hardware have to decide, okay, put which low power state to put in. State is a hardware mechanism implemented in circuits, right? You could gate the clock, you could gate the power. So this is the two common way of the hardware state implementation. And there are different, you don't have to gate the clock or gate the power for the entire module. The module also have different parts. I mean, so you have power states that gate different parts of the module's power clock to have different level of trade-off between wake-up latency and power consumption. Okay, this is a distinction between software modes and hardware states. Now, the second thing about the SoC power management is the modules are organized into domains, right? Not every module have its dedicated clock source. Right, because clock source will take extra hardware, right? Frequency synthesizer, PLL, divider, whatever. So often a group of modules share a clock source. That's called a clock domain, right? So you can gate the clock for each module, But when the clocks for all the modules in the clock domain are gated, you can shut down the clock source in that domain, which will result in additional power saving. Okay? And then multiple clock domain will make up a power domain, right? That means for this, all the modules in this power domain and all the clock domains in this power domain share the same power source. There's a single switch there. You can turn it off. Therefore, the power VDD to this whole domain will be gated, so they will not drain leakage power consumption, right? Or the power domain could have another state that's called retention. That is, you can shut down, you can cut the power to most of the parts of the domain, except the registers that will retain the states, right? That's called retention mode. So, but this basically make the whole SOC power management hierarchical structure, right? Starting from module, you have clock domain, you have power domain. There's even a voltage domain that I don't talk about here, which is not relevant to the subject, so that's why I ignore it. Okay, so as we talk about the clock domain, each domain have a states, right? Clock domain can be on or off, right? When the off states, you shut down the clock source. And in the power domain, there are typically 3 states. You could have on, that means it's normal operational, the power is supplied. You could be off, that's power is completely off, there's no leakage power consumption. Or retention, in retention state, all the state keeping hardware, like registers, will be powered, but rest of the combinational logic will be powered off, okay? Now, runtime power management is actually a collaboration between software and hardware, and I explain in theory how it's done, okay? Basically, this is an example. I showed one power domain with multiple clock domains. What it is, the software will trigger the enable and disable module, right? When the module is idle, the software will disable it, right? Once software disables it, and then the hardware will gate the clock. It's not a function that stops the clock from propagating to this module. And once all the modules within the clock domain is gated, is disabled, the whole clock domain will be automatically gated by hardware, right? And once all the clock domain are off in the off modes, the power domain will get into low power states, right? It's also triggered by hardware. And which state to go, retention or off, is depends on the software set requirements, which we'll talk about later on, okay? So the software has 3 responsibilities here, okay? Number 1 is to decide when to disable a module. For this, you have to know whether this module is doing useful thing. Does it have pending task? You better keep it on if there's pending task, right? And number 2, you have to save the execution context of the module before you disable it, right? Because when you disable it, hardware will think, okay, it's useless, you have saved it, I can do whatever I want with the module. Therefore, you have to save, for example, the register content into a safe place before you hand over the hardware to say you can now turn it off. That's the second responsibility. The third responsibility, decide what's the target state, right, the domain can get into, right? Either you can turn off or you can put into retention state. For clock domain, can you actually put a clock domain off? Because once you put the domain into a low power state, to wake up, there's a latency, right? And many applications, they cannot tolerate latency, right? They have to express a requirement to say, hey, I'm using this. I may not use it for this next 10 seconds, but you have to keep it in the on mode, because whenever I want to use it, I want it to be immediately on, no latency at all. So in that case, the software have to configure the hardware to say, when I disable it and you go ahead automatically put into a no power state, this is the lowest possible power state you can put inside. Okay. Now, let me look at Linux, how Linux does it. Okay. In Linux, driver does most of the stuff, device driver. And the user program will set the QoS, quality of service requirements, through a Linux power management QoS framework. And there's APIs a program can call to say, I cannot tolerate latency higher than this one, right? And then this, the QoS framework will, the device drivers will fulfill the QoS requirement by call the right APIs and to set the target no power state that the device can go into. Device is a module here. Device and module, same thing in this context. And for example, this parameter could be idle timeout. After idle for how long the module can go to sleep, or when it goes to sleep, this is the lowest power possible power state you can get into. Okay, and more importantly, the driver tracks pending tasks. The driver have to decide whether this particular module has pending tasks, therefore I can disable or not. Right? In Linux provides this thing called Linux Runtime Power Management Framework. Essentially, is a reference counting framework. They keep a reference counter for every module, right? And provide APIs, it's called PM runtime get and put, and the device driver have to call these APIs to increase or decrease the reference counter, right? That means when you receive a task, you increase the counter. When your task is done, you have to make sure you decrease the counter. Therefore, when this counter becomes 0, the runtime power management framework will just call the driver's write API to disable the module. Okay, so this is how Linux works. Sounds all nice, very nice, and if you done it correctly, everything should work. Runtime power management should be perfect. All the idle components should be sleeping, right? To recap, what happens? Your drivers in Linux triggers enable and disable of the module, each individual module, and your hardware triggers which state, right? Decide which state the hardware the module go to certain no power states. And the driver makes this decision based on the QoS requirements and also whether you have pending task. And the most important thing is whether the module has pending task, right? If there's pending task, I have to enable it, keep it enabled. If it does not have pending task, I should consider disable it, okay? So this sounds all good, right? If you've done everything correctly, if the driver developers are capable, things should be all smooth, nice. But the reality is not this, right? And when we start looking to how today's mobile SoC, the drivers input runtime power management, we're shocked by how many drivers don't do power management at all. Right? I'll give you some example. Okay, let's revisit the driver supposed to do disable module, right? Save the existing context and decide the target state of domain. What we found out is this one, right? Device driver, they fail this responsibility, right? They don't put the module into disable mode at all. Okay, here's the example. This is from TI OMAP. This is for the SoC families. All the SoC under this family, OMAP 4, OMAP 3, OMAP 5, all have this problem. Samsung Exynos, right, all these different models have this problem. Freescale, IMX, all different models have problem. Tegra, all this problem has problem. What we found out is the drivers don't input runtime power management at all, right? This is a driver we found out that don't have it. This is the I/O controllers, UART, WDT, USB, keyboard, you name it, and you find from some of them eventually have a power management code implemented. Often after a year or two delay, there will be software patch released and then they have it. So think about it, these phones have a lifetime probably 1 year, 1 or 2 years, right? The new processor will come out in 1 year also. So essentially during the entire lifetime of these devices, these on-chip modules don't have runtime power management at all. They're left on all the time. They're draining the power. Okay, and for one of them, the NVIDIA Tegra's the SD controller, even by this time we checked just 1 week ago, still have no power management, right? And the reason for it is maybe the device drivers are too busy, right? And chips comes, just make sure that they have to write the driver, make sure that the device, the module actually work. Power management, something nobody will hold me responsible until very late. So they get the function correct, they don't worry about power management. And on the other hand, when we try to manually implement one of the runtime power management for one of the device, the display controller on OMAP, we realize how hard it is to actually implement the power management code there. It's 22,000 lines of code, driver, and the grad students spend about 2 weeks studying the code, try to figure out where to insert 2 lines of code. essentially calling the Linux Runtime PM APIs, and it couldn't, right? So we feel full sympathy of this driver developers, right? The driver, a notorious complex software that has so many exit point, entry point, and so many different execution paths, and you have to make sure every time before you use it, you call the runtime PM runtime put, and when you're done, you have to make sure to call PM runtime get. That's turned out to be extremely difficult. So what happens is this display controller is left on all the time, right? Even when you look at the screen, your screen's on, you're reading it, your display controller is actually idle, not doing anything, right? That should be put in no power mode, but it's not. It's always running, burning power, right? Now another problem that actually makes another phenomenon that makes this issue worse is the dependency between modules, right? If you have one bad module in terms of power management, you actually ruin the power management for the entire domain, right? Remember to put the domain, a clock domain to low power mode, you have to disable all the modules in that domain, right? To put a power domain to no power mode, you have to put all the clock domain to no power mode inside it. So that means if you forgot to disable one module, all the other modules in the clock domain, their clock source will be on, and they cannot be turned off, right? So therefore, for example, the GPIO is such a simple thing. GPIO is a general purpose I/O pin on system on chip. It consumes probably 100, maybe 10 microwatts of power consumption. So maybe that's the reason the driver developer don't bother to implement power management. But the thing is, because it stays in a power domain called L4 PER, which is L4 the peripheral bus, peripheral. L4 in TI term means the peripheral bus and peripheral devices. The whole thing actually leads to 17 milliwatts of power waste, right? Your GPIO controller can maybe consume 10 microwatts. But because you don't disable it, you keep all the other modules in the same power domain on, right? That's 17 milliwatts power waste. Now, of course, to solve this problem, there are three solutions. Number one, you just get better and more driver developers, right? Anybody who working system who know this is impossible, right? There's never enough driver developers. There's no good driver developer. Driver developer are the evil programmers in the world, right? Most of the software bugs, if you read papers, most of the system bugs come from drivers. So these guys are really the lousy programmers. Okay, so this is impossible. The second one is you can provide some tools, right? If I can have some tools, I take their code, I can run through them, and I can insert the power management code ourselves. That'd be good too. We did that, but we have a tool actually reporting the paper to appear in SPOS, but I'm going to talk about that today. To me, that's a bug fixing tool. I'm not that interested. What I'm going to talk about today is why don't we just revamp the runtime power management architecture? Instead of let device driver do it, let's take the responsibility away. Let's think about new architecture. That's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of the talk. So that's what I'm talking about, centralized runtime power management framework. So our key insight is, for runtime power management, you need three pieces of information, right, to get it work. Number one, you need to know what is user programs, quality of service requirements, right? What's the latency you can tolerate? If the user cannot tolerate any latency, then you should not put disabled module at all, right? If based on different tolerance, maybe you have a different level of low power state you can put the module in. Number two is, what is wake up latency for different low power modes for your modules, for your domains, right? You need this information to match the QoS requirements, right? Number three is whether a module is busy, whether the module has pending task, right? These three pieces of information, right now, the first two, you can't get them from the first one is come from user, from Linux PM QoS framework. The user program will have a API to call to tell you what's the latency tolerance. The second one you can get from datasheet, right? Your driver developer will know that. That's a fact from the datasheet. The number three is really the tricky one, right? Whether a module has pending tasks. Right now in Linux is a driver maintenance, because everybody who would like to use the module have to go through the driver. Therefore, driver essentially knows who is actually using, who is issuing tasks, how many tasks are pending there. So our key insight is, hey, this can also be inferred without any help from the driver. If we can do this, then we don't need driver involved in the runtime power management decision. Okay. And I'll talk about two solutions to this, right? How to infer whether a module has pending task. The first one is software only. That's free, save in 10 minutes for free. And then I'll talk about a solution that's not free. You have to modify the hardware. The software solution is there's a hypothesis, and we'll revisit the hypothesis later on. Is when there is a pending task, the registers of the module will be accessed frequently, right? So that means if there's a task waiting for the module, or the module is working on something, if you observe the register, I mean the software is accessing the register frequently. So if you can monitor the register activity of these modules, then you can tell if the module has pending tasks. So that's a hypothesis, and we found it actually works for many modules. We'll talk about later. And then we'll talk about hardware system solution, which is not free. You have to modify the hardware a little bit. Now here's the example, right, about the hypothesis. This is taking the I2C controller, which is a very simple serial bus protocol. In your phones, your accelerometer, your IMU is very likely to collect your SoC through this interface. So when your CPU, software and CPU try to use I2C controller, you'll call the I2C controller driver, and you have to set I2C message address. You have sent something there, right? You have to write into the register of this I2C controller. And okay, and this guy is going to produce an interrupt back, tell you, okay, I'm done. The FIFO, the buffer is drained. Now you can put a message inside. Then you would acknowledge the interrupt. You would maybe read, write into that buffer, right? And you would keep on doing this, interrupt, read, write. So therefore, if you can monitor the interface, the access to the I2C controller register, you will be able to infer if there's any pending tasks or ongoing tasks with this I2C controller. Okay. Now, here's the solution. How would you monitor it? So it turns out on all ARM-based SoC, you can memory map the registers for all these modules on SysOnC to a memory region, become part of your virtual address space. And then what you can do, you can use memory protection to trap the access to them, right? If you remove the access permission to this region, whenever software try to access this register, it will generate an exception. And then you know, okay, there's someone is accessing the register. Okay? And what we do is periodically remove access permission to this region. And this is the period I call T threshold. We'll talk about later on. You periodically do it. And after you remove the permission, there is someone try to access the register, then a generic exception, then you know you do bookkeeping, you say, hey, someone actually accessed this register. And then what you do, you ground the permission back. Therefore, the following access would access without memory exception so that there's no overhead. But you know, your bookkeeping knows, hey, this module has been accessed since last time I remove the permission, right? Okay, let me give you an example. It's a little bit complicated, right? So let's see, there's a logic here is, if there's no memory exception since last time I checked it, then that means no register access in the past period, and then I can assume there's no pending task. Therefore, I can disable it. Okay, and how it works is, on one hand, this is an enabled module. Periodically, we remove read-write permissions, right? This is each check, and this is a generated fixed period. You can do it with a timer interrupt, right? What happens is, after you remove the read-write permission, and you have register access here, the first one will generate a memory exception. And when you deal with memory exception, you mark, okay, since last time I did this, I observed a register access. Then you enable the permission so that all the following access can go through without producing any exception. And then when you, at the next periodical check, of course, first time you remove the read-write permission again, and you take notes to say, hey, if I have observed register access in the past period or not. If you do, then you go on, you do nothing. That means this guy is being used. But in the second case, when you check this the second time, you realize, okay, there's nobody has accessed the registers in the last period. And in that case, you could just, all tasks finished, and I could do something to disable the module. Okay, this is very simple logic here. Right, you periodically remove the permission so that you can trap register access. Right, and if you don't track any register access for a period of time, T threshold, you assume there's no pending task. Therefore, you go ahead and disable the software module. Right, so that the hardware can put in no power states.
What's the side effect of doing the memory exception?
Overhead. Overhead. Right, there is a little bit overhead. I'll talk about it. Very
That can be super fast.
that's very small. Especially you're doing like once, let's see, this threshold is about 100 milliseconds. The exception take maybe 10 microseconds to handle, right? And remember this time the CPU is already busy doing something. This is not the phone, your phone is not sleeping this time. It's you're using it, and the CPU is periodically check this, okay? And if when the module is disabled, then you have to track the register access so that you can wake up, you can enable it, right? What do you do is make sure you remove the permission when it's disabled. So therefore, whenever someone tries to access the module, the register access will generate a permission, the exception, and during the exception handling, you can enable the module, okay? So this is how this approach can disable, enable the modules when there's, depending on whether they're pending tasks. Okay, pretty simple. Now, based on this hypothesis, based on this idea, we could design a centralized runtime power management architecture that instead of net drivers to call the Linux runtime power management to keep the reference counter, the driver only provide the mechanism for power management. For example, the function calls to save context, the function calls put the driver into no power state. But when and which function call to call is decided by this central power management agent, which is the kernel module. Have two parts, monitor and controller. And the monitor is the module that does all the register access monitoring to infer if there are pending tasks. If there are no pending tasks, it tells the controller to call the right callbacks to disable, enable the module. Okay. And of course, we implement this, we use a Panda board, which is a developed board with TI OMAP 4460. With the same chip in the Galaxy Nexus and very close to the one using Google Glass. And we use Linaro Android and use Linux kernel 3.2. And we tested the modules, the MMC multimedia card controller, which is used for the file system SD and a securities card you have put on your phone. And I2C SDIO controllers, these are used by the Wi-Fi chip. In a Wi-Fi chip, talk to your SoC through these two interfaces, right? And then the display controller, right? It's part of the display subsystem. And we work on the Panda board to generate 10 minutes of traces with about 50 user events that browse the web, access email, basically exercise these modules, right? And here's the results. When we looked out of this 10 minutes, what's the percentage of time the modules are disabled, right? And here's this white box is a stop Linux driver. And in the MMC and I2C controller case, the device driver actually do correctly runtime power management. And you can see what we achieved very close, right? The percentage-wise, the time the module spent in disable mode is very close, right? We're using the period as a period 100 milliseconds. And for SDIO and display controller, the stock Linux drivers don't have any power management code, right? So the module is always on, so they save nothing. And in our case, we can save about 80%. 80% of the time, this module will put in sleep, And overhead, as Hesser asked, so memory exception handling costs about 2,500 cycles. And it's about 2.5 microsecond if the CPU runs about 1 gigahertz. It's very small overhead, but still overhead. I know people hate any overhead, but it's small overhead. And memory exception, remember, it only occurs periodically, right? No more than every 100 milliseconds in this case. So it's a very small sacrifice. And you actually can do measure the performance. For example, we do the SD card throughput measurement and the Wi-Fi throughput measurements. You can see the stock Linux put aside as our system. They're very, very close. The difference is actually smaller than the variations of multiple measurements. Okay. Now, how significant are these results? I mean, it's about 3 hours standby lifetime if you put on a Galaxy Nexus, which is not that big. I hope I could say I double your battery lifetime, but 3 hours, that's what we can see, right? And it's, for the SDIO controller, it's about 2.4 hours, it's saving about 17 minutes watt. And for the display controller, it's about 10 milliwatt power consumption. And of course, this estimation of 3 hours is based on how often you use the device, right? Because we save power only when you are using the device. This is runtime power management. And this is using a trace we collected about 4 years ago on iPhones, how often people use the device. And today, with people spending more time on your phone, we assume the saving will be more significant. And also, on platform like Google Glass, where you have much smaller display, therefore, what we save will be relatively more compared to the rest of the system. And because the battery is much smaller in that case, what we save will be also translated to more hours of battery lifetime. So we believe for this wearable devices, the device intended to be always on, the runtime power management saving in terms of battery lifetime will be much more, right? But even 3 hours, I'm very proud of that result, right? I'm not ashamed of it. 3 hours, that's good, right? So my grandson actually told me, Lin, 3 hours, do you want to write a paper about this? I mean, even I can tell you industry, for example, if something is free, you can extend the standby lifetime by 3 hours, they'll be so happy. They actually, in many cases, to extend the battery life by 1 hour, 2 hours, they were willing to even pay 10 cents to add a special chip to actually use a little bit extra space on the board and that chip to achieve that goal, right? So 3 hours, in my opinion, is good. It's good, right? I'm proud of it. Now, let's recap this. The central power management architecture is you relieve the driver from make decision about runtime power management, and we achieve comparable performance energy savings compared to the hand-tuned power management. And there's no hardware modification. However, there are limitations to this problem, right? Number one is it's not very aggressive. How aggressive, how fine grained you can put the module into sleep is bounded by the threshold. The periodic, you remove the memory permissions. And that is bounded. You cannot arbitrarily small because some device, they will, even as busy, there will be gaps between the register access, right? If the threshold is too small, you would forcibly put a module, disable module. That causes problem. So this is actually cannot be small. And then, for example, the longest DMA transaction on the bus.
Did you observe that any of the modules before were under that threshold?
I will talk about that. Yes, that's a good question. So of course, and it also have a little bit overhead. You have periodic exceptions. And more importantly, Tim is probably politely suggesting this won't work for all modules, right? Some modules, our assumptions, this assumption, let's revisit again. If there's a pending task, there will be frequent register access. We basically found out all the I/O controllers. This is true. Any I/O, the SPI, I2C, GPIO, USB, because you're sending packets out there. If you have packets queuing there, the system is always putting things out, right? There's always register access. But for some computational module is also true. For example, face detection IC, right? That module works on stream of frames from the camera. Therefore, it's bounded by the frame rate right, which is about 20 to 30 frame per second. So 100 millisecond is the threshold we use, determined by how long the DMA transaction could be, the largest DMA transaction could be. And we found 100 millisecond, even 50 millisecond works for all of the I/O controllers and some of the actuators. The most important thing, it doesn't work is for programmable devices like GPU or DSP, because you can write a very long program, put on GPU to run or DSP to run, arbitrarily long. There's no register access at all, right? But the module is working on something important. You cannot disable it. So this software-only solution will not work for GPU and DSP, as we talk about here right now. And maybe you can do it in software, use software only by, for example, monitor interrupts, because GPU, when it's working on something, you can program it to generate fancy interrupts, and you can, from that, infer whether the GPU is active or not. But we thought maybe we should go ahead and make some hardware change. It's actually pretty simple hardware change. That is, why don't we net the module to tell the rest of the system I'm busy or not, right? That's the exact reason that prevent the software-only solution from working for GPU. I cannot tell if GPU is busy, because GPU is doing things inside. There's no sign out there. Actually, we suspect such modification already exists. It's just we don't know which register bit to read. But let's assume they don't exist. Let's add a bit to these modules. So when it's busy, it's 1. When it's idle, it's 0. Then by polling this bit, you will be able to infer if this guy is actually a pending task or not. And here, then we would have a hardware system monitor, and this architecture would be the same, exact the same, except using memory exceptions, where we use this register bit, polling this register bit, to infer if it's idle or not. Okay, so this is the behavior of this busy idle register. It's not exactly busy idle register, right? So it's set to busy, or 1, whenever the module starts processing tasks. When it's busy, it immediately put this register as 1, right? But it would not put this register back to 0 when it's become idle. It wouldn't do it immediately, right? It would reset to 0 or idle only when this register bit is being read. Someone's reading it, and it turns out right now the module is also idle. Then after the read, the bit will be set to 0. Okay, this is important. If this register is set as just simply indicate busy or idle, then if the software periodically polling it, if your polling period is not short enough, you cannot detect the short busy activity in between 2 polling, right? So this will be the problem. So the return to 0 idle is always done after the read. Okay, so let me use it. So basically, the timing information from this register is not whether it's busy or idle. When it's busy, 1, that means the module has once been busy since last read, right? When it's idle, 0, that means the module has always been idle since last read. Okay, this is the semantics of this register bit. And here's an example, okay? Basis is a monitor. This is a module's activity. This is the value of the busy idle register value, right? This is the elaboration of the behavior register. So basically, this is the monitor from the central power management agent would periodically check this register, read this register, okay? Let's see this module is busy for this period and for this period. Then let's look the value of the busy idle register, right? It'll be begin as 1 because it's busy, right? If it's busy, we'll put it as 1, right? And when you read, the busy idle register will be 1. And because it's right now busy, this register will be kept at 1, right? It will go on to be 1. Now you read it again. Your second read comes here. And at this time, you will read 1. But because the module is not doing anything useful, this register will be reset back to 0, right? And then when the module starts processing next task, immediately it reads to 1, okay? And the next time you read it again, you find you read it as 1, but because it's not doing anything useful, is set to 0. Okay, next time you read it, this register, you read out the value as 0. Now you know this in the past period of this time, this module has been idle at least for this period of time. Okay, then you can make decision to disable or enable it based on the QoS requirements. Okay. Okay, and this period can be as small as 1 millisecond, very short. It's not bounded by the DMA transaction time as we talked about before. This will allow very aggressive power management. You can, if it's possible, you can even disable module for 10 milliseconds, right? Now we prototype this to check if it works, or how easy to make the hardware modification. You take the Xilinx Zeta board, have a Zinc SoC. The SoC actually is nice to have a FPGA module inside. So basically, we take some open core IPs, which is kind of open source hardware design, and Xilinx also provides some simple ones. What we did is for the I2C controller, we take from, I believe this is a Xilinx I2C controller. It's in Verilog. What we do, we collect this I2C bus to an accelerometer off the board, off the chip showing here, and we try to disable, enable it, and we input that and that register bit to this IP, and use that information to implement our centralized power management to see if it works or not. Okay, and the hardware modification actually turned out to be very small, because if you guys have taken any logic design course, you know sequential circuits always design a state machine, right? So the states are already there. You just need to figure out which states correspond to idle, not doing anything useful. Essentially, the circuit is very simple. It's just you find out the right signals in the Verilog code. You basically pull them out to a single bit register, which is a flip-flop, right? It's very simple hardware. And you only need a small number of extra gates that you can show here. You just need these gates. You just get the signal. This would be the IP core you deal with, and this is the extra hardware, okay? Because the final state machine is already there in the code, it's very easy to use. And if you look at what the code modification you can do, this is an example, right? Essentially, you try to find out the state information, the state machine, and you just export this register, be the idle out, right? This is to make sure the right behavior. You just need these 6 lines of code in Verilog to implement for the I2C controller, okay? And how much time it takes to do it? We actually tried with 3 open source hardware IPs. I mean, there are simple modules, SPI controller, I2C controller, not super complicated. This is a senior undergrad. This is from Tsinghua, actually interned at our lab for the summer. He was able to do this in a day, 12 hours, I think. 12 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours for each of them. It's just undergrad, right? He didn't design this module. He read the Verilog code and insert the code to actually add that register bit. What I'm trying to say is the development effort and hardware overhead is very small. If you look at the gates, actual gates, it's about a few tenths of them, so not that much. And this overhead would be really small if you apply it to GPU, right, or DSP, which would have maybe millions of gates, right? So this kind of a register-based solution would best fit for GPU and DSP's computational heavy modules. Okay, so let's recap it, right? So the small effort and this busy idle register, and you can enable very aggressive power management and incur very little overhead, almost zero overhead in terms of power consumption performance. And it works for all SoC module, okay? So I suspect most of the module actually already have this register there. It's not documented there. We don't know how to use it. So use it, you can basically make the centralized power management even better. Okay, that's the point. Now, moving forward. So, I mean, of course, the solution we have is not perfect. There are ways to improve them. Some of you maybe already have some ideas. For example, for soft-only solution, so far we only monitor if the register is accessed. We don't distinguish between read and write, right? We don't use interrupts. We don't use interrupt inferable activities. But if you take this into consideration, you can probably refine the inference about pending tasks. For the hardware solutions, right? So far we used register, be the idle register. This be the idle register requires the driver monitor to pull the register to infer if the idle or not. So why not use the interrupt, right? I mean, I would suspect supporting interrupt will require more hardware modification. Probably works best for more expensive modules like GPU, but be the idle register is more suitable for simple one because overhead is small. But interrupt-based notification is you don't need the polling. You don't need to involve the CPU. CPU can go sleep. You wake up only if the status change, right? So interrupt-based design also have advantage that can be exported. Now, more important, I think the next important thing we should do is completely remove CPU out of the cycle. Remember here, today's runtime power management rely on the power-hungry CPU, right? Your drivers, this is in Linux case, right? Drivers and Linux runtime PM runs on CPU, right? But these days, you know, CPU is power-hungry, and most of the time you try to not use CPU. Even for your phones, for example, you're listening to music, MP3 playing, it's not done through the CPU. It's done through some microcontroller cores, right? The Google Now features, when you talk to your phone, right, speak to your phone wake up and try to analyze this speech. The first few stages done in a microcontroller and even in analog circuits. It's not with the CPU. You try to keep the CPU in sleep. If you're doing pedometer application on your iPhone, right, the pedometer application actually runs on a low power M7, M8 coprocessor, not in the CPU. So you like the CPU to go sleep. I mean, this runtime power management right now requires the CPU engagement. And for existing Linux runtime power management, it's impossible to move the whole thing to the low power core because the drivers have a very wide interface. I share a lot of states with the rest of OS. If you move this out to the low power chip, the coherence maintenance between these two will be high, right? Now, this is most of the SoC these days have ultra low power cores, right? Either on chip or off chip. And Apple's case is the M7, M8 chip is a Cortex M3 and M4 core there, okay? Linux is impossible for you to put the whole thing here, right? It's very expensive. So for the centralized architecture we talk about, actually provide opportunity to move them there, right? Because the monitor, as first step, the monitor could be moved there, right? The monitor essentially monitors the bus, right? The bus pulling the register memory activities to infer if there's a pending task, right? In case I have to change the disable, enable a device, a module here, I will call into the controller to do it, right? The most time when I monitor a module device, I only need the ultra low power core. I don't need the CPU. I only need to wake up the CPU, engage the CPU when I have to do something to disable, enable. Right? Even further, right? We can move the whole thing there, right? We can move the entire the monitoring controller, the central power management agent there. The only thing you have to run from the low power core is the cores, the function calls to disable, enable the devices, right? And this tradition is part of the driver, but because they have a very narrow interface, share very well-defined states with the rest of the driver, you actually can maintain, you use software to maintain the coherence between them. Use a software distributed shared memory. So this is something we're interested in, we're working on right now. We try to get CPU out of the decision cycle of the power management, right, runtime power management, so that your CPU is in sleep while the low power cores can still work on to make sure the idle components go to sleep, right? Okay, to summarize, so I hope I convinced you driver direct power management is harmful. They never work in practice. It sounds nice, but you never trust the driver developers. They are not good programmers, right? Number two, a centralized architecture is equally effective, and it's very little hardware modification can go a long way, can actually be efficient and address all the problems on SoC. And finally, I think it's possible, it's hopeful we can get CPU out of the loop, runtime power management to make it even more efficient. Okay, so all the examples, source code, traces, whatever you need to know about this work is already online. So if you go to our webpage and there's a download page, you will see there's a source for ASPOS 2015 paper. There's a whole page, everything's there. If you want to play look the code. There's also a link to the example code for the driver, the bad drivers, right? You actually can figure it out. And also there's papers appear in S+. We actually put paper online, so if you're interested, please read it and let me know if you have questions. Of course, this work is done by grad students. I tried to understand it on the slides here, though yesterday. So they did all the work, they did all the code, and Xiaozhu is actually assistant professor now at Purdue, and Chao decided that this project too boring. He joined Google, so after this project. So I'm the only one at the RISE now understand this piece of work, and I have to present it here in S+. All right, thank you very much. That's what I have.
Regarding, since we're talking about links, Lin's talk and his slides will be online, so that, in case you want to review it or ask your friends to take a look at it, feel free to go to IE online. I think the video will be available tomorrow. The link should be on today for the talk. Okay. So anybody have any questions? So for Lin, I'll start with one. So I was wondering, you were reviewing a lot of the SoC architecture, like a power management architecture, the hierarchical that's being harming everything. With that, is there any way to modify that? That seems to be is that a fundamental root for all these problems? If you can kind of modify that, would that solve the
Modify
problem?
what?
The hierarchical.
No, I think you have to do hierarchical because the power management hardware is expensive. You cannot dedicate to each module. You have to share. For example, the switch to turn off the power, it's expensive. You cannot have a power switch for every individual module.
It's a cost.
Right, it's a cost. And for clock, you cannot have a separate clock source for every module. You have to share them. That's why you have a domain. Clock domain, power domain, voltage domain. It's true on all SoCs these days.
And then for the hardware method you have, do you have what would be the saving in terms of the hardware system? You don't have
The saving is the same. It's the same. It's achieve the same thing. They probably even more. It will be as effective as the correctly done Linux way, put it this way, right? But there will be a little bit overhead. Of course, you add 10 gates here, they always add a little power, but that will be probably a few, even less than 1 microwatt, I would say. But the saving is overwhelmingly bigger than the overhead. So hardware assist is more effective than the software solution. And the software solution is already very close to good Linux drivers. Right? So we try to achieve the same effectiveness as Linux driver, good Linux drivers. Okay.
I see. So you're removing the jobs.
Right. So we try to get them fired. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So for the software solution, that's sort of like a prediction. So if the prediction is wrong.
It's not prediction. It's not prediction. We're not prediction.
Because what you are doing is like check if there's no memory access, you assume that there's no pending task.
Right. That's
what if there's a pending task?
what you define pending tasks, right? If the program hasn't issued anything, that's something you have to predict, right? We're not trying to predict that. So current SoC doesn't predict that either, right? What they do is the program will call the QS callbacks to say, hey, I may not issue any calls right now, but when I issue, you have to serve me within 10 microseconds, right? And then when you do power management, your driver have to figure out, okay, 10 microseconds. If I put into the no power state, I cannot wake up in time. Then I should refrain from doing that. So it's not prediction. Today, I mean, there's a lot of papers talk about predict future behavior. I know Sandy Irani from UC Riverside, I think. Well, she does not work about online learning, predictive power management. But in real Linux system, SoC, there's no prediction made. It's all about if you are busy right now, if you actually have work ongoing. If there are no, if you meet the timeout, there could be a timeout there, you go to sleep. There's no active prediction. So we're trying to behave the same way as a Linux runtime power management. We try now to do better in terms of adding predictive power.
Just a follow-up though, but if you put the thing in the low power mode,
Mm-hmm.
you use the registers to kind of tell you whether you think you can go into low power mode. But if you were wrong, then what
Why
happens?
it's wrong? How could it go wrong?
What if I had if I had some system where
Mhm.
registers are just not used that much, but I still have work that I'm doing?
That would be the device that you need the hardware support, right? So all these I/O controllers, they don't have this behavior. So when there's something going on, you actively see the patterns and the register access. We have not seen any I/O controller that behave like that, right? But for GPU, it does, and the GPU could work on forever long, right, without generating any register access pattern. So for this type of device, you just need to add that bit.
If you're approached with an unknown device, how do you convince yourself that it doesn't have that property? I guess that's what I'm
Yeah,
thinking.
I don't know. So I think then you have to know it. The device driver eventually is a device driver developer to decide, okay, should I net the central power man do it, or my device is so tricky that the central power management is not going to be enough. So that's how it would work, right? In reality, we hope. So, but the thing is, fundamentally, we think the Linux runtime PM framework is broken. It's rely on the drivers, and drivers cannot be trusted for correctness. So that's our opinion, right?
Okay, last one.
Earlier in there, you showed that the hardware is you have to shut off everything in an entire group in order to turn off the clock for that particular hardware block.
Right.
Is this mechanism actually aware of hardware that belongs to certain groups so that it can more aggressively shut off entire groups and less aggressive groups?
Oh, there's actually hardware dedicated to that, right? If you look at SoC, on TS chips, it's called PRCM, Power Reset Clock Management Module. NVIDIA, they call it Power Manager. So there's a dedicated hardware module there that actually monitors the status of all these modules and also in charge of translate the states for the power domains. So there are dedicated hardware for doing this on chip. So this is a hardware job right now.
All right, in the interest of time, let's wrap up this, and we'll thank Lin again.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.